October 6th, 105 BC. Two Roman armies stand on the banks of the Rhone River. 120,000 men. The largest force Rome has assembled in decades. By sunset, almost every single one of them will be dead. Not because of superior tactics, not because they were outnumbered, but because two generals hated each other more than they feared the enemy. For 8 years, the Cimbri have been moving south, a massive migration triggered by floods in their homeland on the Jutland Peninsula. Hundreds of thousands of people, warriors, families, entire tribes, searching for new land. They've already crushed 4 Roman armies, at Nerea, at Burdigala. In every battle, Roman blood has soaked into Gallic soil. Rome is terrified. They call it the terror cimbricus, the Cimbrian terror. The Senate knows this is its last chance. They send 80,000 legionaries north, the biggest army since Hannibal's invasion. 2 commanders, 2 armies. It should have been Rome's greatest victory. Instead, it became Rome's worst nightmare. Meet Quintus Servilius Caepio, proconsul, patrician, from one of Rome's oldest noble families. Everything about him screams aristocratic privilege. He's just come from Toulouse, where he liberated 50,000 gold bars and 10,000 silver bars from sacred temples. Only the silver made it back to Rome. The gold, mysteriously stolen by bandits many suspect Caepio himself hired. Now meet Gnaeus Mallius Maximus, consul of 105 BC, the senior commander by law. But here's the problem. He's a novus homo, a new man, the first in his family to reach the consulship. In Caepio's eyes, a peasant playing dress-up in a general's armor. When Maximus arrives in Gaul to take command, Caepio refuses to acknowledge his authority. He sets up camp 8 Roman miles away, across the river from Maximus's position. 2 Roman armies, camping separately, refusing to coordinate. The Senate sends messengers begging them to unite. Caepio ignores every order. His aristocratic blood, he believes, outranks any legal authority a commoner might hold. The Cimbri are watching, and they can't believe their luck. The Cimbri king, Boiorix, sends ambassadors to negotiate. They approach Maximus, the senior consul, the legal commander. They're offering terms. Maybe a peaceful migration through Roman territory, maybe land grants in exchange for service. Maximus listens. He's cautious, diplomatic. This could end without bloodshed. Caepio is furious. His social inferior is about to negotiate peace and claim all the glory. His inferior is about to be remembered as the man who saved Rome without fighting. Unacceptable. On October 6th, while negotiations are still ongoing, Caepio makes his decision. He orders his army to cross the Rhone. He launches a unilateral attack on the Cimbri camp. No warning to Maximus. No coordination, no plan, just ego. Caepio's 40,000 men march straight into the enemy. The Cimbri aren't surprised. They've been watching the Roman camps for days, seeing the dysfunction, the separate positions, the lack of unity. When Caepio attacks, they're ready. The Roman advance hits a wall of Germanic warriors. Tall men with long swords and shields, fighting with a ferocity that Caepio's troops have never seen. The legions falter, then break. The Cimbri counterattack, fast and brutal. They encircle Caepio's forces, cutting off any retreat to the river. Thousands of Romans die in minutes. The formation collapses into chaos. Men throw down their weapons and run. But there's nowhere to go. The Cimbri chase them into the Rhone. Roman soldiers, weighed down by armor, sink into the current. Those who try to swim are cut down by Germanic cavalry. Caepio's entire army, 40,000 men, is annihilated. The proconsul himself barely escapes, fleeing south with a handful of survivors. Now the Cimbri turn toward Maximus. Maximus's camp is in chaos. His men have just watched their comrades being slaughtered across the river. Morale is shattered. Fear spreads like wildfire through the ranks, and Maximus has no idea what Caepio was planning. No intelligence, no warning, no time to prepare. The Cimbri attack while the Romans are still reeling. They hit Maximus's camp from multiple directions. The legionaries try to form defensive lines, but panic has already taken hold. The camp's position is disastrous. Caepio's reckless attack has put Maximus's troops with their backs to the Rhone. When the lines break, there's only one direction to run: into the river. Thousands try to cross. Most drown. The water turns red with Roman blood. The Cimbri show no mercy. They slaughter camp followers, servants, and anyone fleeing the carnage. By evening, the battle is over. 80,000 Roman soldiers are dead. 40,000 auxiliaries and camp followers were massacred. 120,000 people gone in a single day. Let that number sink in. At Cannae, Hannibal killed 50,000 to 70,000 Romans in what was considered Rome's worst military disaster. Arausio was worse, nearly double the casualties. But here's the difference. Cannae was lost to Hannibal's genius, a tactical masterpiece that military schools still study. Arausio was lost to pride, to ego, to two Roman generals who cared more about their personal rivalry than about their men's lives. After the battle, Cimbri priestesses sacrifice Roman captives to their gods. They drowned Roman horses in the Rhone. They break Roman weapons and throw gold and silver into the river as offerings. Then they do something unexpected. They don't invade Italy. The road to Rome is wide open. The Alpine passes are undefended. The city is there for the taking. But the Cimbri turn west instead, toward Spain, looking for more plunder. This decision will save Rome and doom the Cimbri. News reaches Rome. Panic erupts. The Senate strips Caepio of his command immediately. They put him on trial for the loss of his army. The verdict: guilty. Caepio is stripped of his citizenship, forbidden fire and water within 800 miles of Rome. His property is confiscated, the first time this punishment has been used since the days of the monarchy. His family is disgraced. His name becomes a curse word. Maximus fares little better. Though he escapes the harshest punishment, he loses his two sons in the battle and is exiled in disgrace. But Rome needs more than revenge. Rome needs a savior. Enter Gaius Marius. The people elect Marius consul. Not once, but 5 years in a row. Unprecedented. Technically illegal. No one cares. Rome is desperate. Marius looks at the wreckage of Arausio and understands what went wrong. It wasn't just bad leadership. The entire Roman military system is broken. He starts recruiting the landless poor, men with nothing to lose and everything to prove. He removes the property requirement that had limited the legions for centuries. He creates a professional army, standardized training, standardized equipment, soldiers loyal to their general, not just to Rome. The Marian mules, they're called, soldiers who march with full gear, ready for anything. When the Cimbri finally returned in 102 BC, ready to invade Italy, they faced a completely different Roman army. At Aquae Sextiae, Marius ambushes and destroys the Teutones. 90,000 warriors killed. At Vercelli in 101 BC, he crushed the Cimbri. King Boiorix dies on the battlefield. The women commit mass suicide rather than face Roman slavery. The Cimbrian threat is over. Marius is hailed as the third founder of Rome. But Arausio's legacy isn't just about Marius's reforms. It's a warning that echoes through history. When leaders prioritize personal glory over collective survival, everyone pays the price. When pride matters more than strategy, armies die. 120,000 Romans didn't fall to superior tactics or overwhelming numbers. They fell to ego. 2 generals, 1 disaster, and a lesson Rome would never forget. Sometimes the greatest enemy isn't across the battlefield. It's standing in your own camp.